In today's video, we're gonna talk about the mega shingle, why we did it from an architectural intent, how we did it, and the process in which it took to install it. And then we're gonna talk about our secrets behind the finish, what it is, and the life expectancy. Joining me today is Vincent from Possible, the architect on the project.
Nice to see you, Nick.
You too, man. We are talking about the controversial mega shingle. There's a lot of questions that people have on this project, but why are we doing this?
Primary reason we chose to do these oversized shingles is because we ended up intentionally with a very simple form for the home. It's a single gable ridge that's over 100 feet. The clients affectionately refer to it as a house-shaped house, which we love. But when you make a shape this size and this simple at this scale, you have a problem to consider, which is how you perceive it and how do you humanize that scale. And so the mega shingle, which is just a 4x8 sheet of plywood cut in half, creates this oversized version of a familiar shingle in its coursing, but the exposure is 3'6". And so as you approach the building in the landscape, you see something that you can't quite detect or register the scale of the building. And that's happening because that coursing is changing your perceived relationship to that scale. So from a distance, in some ways it looks much smaller than it actually is. As you approach it, you see 3 corners of the building. And this is an almost classical approach to how you position a building. Greeks did this with their temples to exaggerate the scale.
Just for reference, that's one shingle.
Yeah.
And I forget how many we have on the house, but it's somewhere around 541 is the number I'm just gonna make up. So you're talking about the humanizing of it, but why plywood?
A couple of reasons. We wanted to be very resourceful with materials on this project. We really created the most amount of value for the resources that were going into it. And marine grade plywood was a great solution that addressed a lot of those needs from constraints around a budget, constraints around the design intent. We didn't want to simply apply a paint and just conceal the plywood. We wanted to do something that was much more specific to the history of this place, the region, materials that have been developed here. And so we landed on pine tar. Pine tar is an ancient material. The oldest pine tar pits were found in Sweden, and they date back to 500 BC. So this material's been around for a long time.
Our intent from a maintenance coat, just to be clear, that 8 to maybe 12 months from now is that second coat.
Yeah.
And then our expectation is every 3, maybe you could push it 5 years, and it really is going to come down to how it weathers and how it goes through the seasons and ultimately how it deals with, the climate. We're not on the ocean, we're not dealing with salt and things like that. We don't have a lot of tree canopy over the top of it. So that will be just, a matter of what's the expectation of, what it looks like, and then how do we extend the life. So this, reasonably, based on my research and what we've chatted about, this will last 50 plus years, especially with good maintenance. Yep. And like you said, it's, a high quality cedar install with a clear coat that
would be the limit of a high quality cedar siding over a robust Rainscreen. So in terms of weathering and what's gone into the design and construction of this, I think you could think about it from 2 perspectives. There's the Rainscreen and what we're doing to keep the plywood dry and balanced and sustained. And then there's the finish coat, which is the pine tar sealer and finish on it.
The coating's also applied on 6 sides before we're installing and doing the final install. So as we're cutting these corners, that cut gets sealed. And that's really important to know because we want them to be balanced and completely protected on all sides. But to your point, we have a Rainscreen system. So a Rainscreen system is essentially this cavity behind our shingles that allows for this to dry. And the way that dries is through airflow. This core vent is multi-purpose in our case. Architecturally, it's about 3/4 of an inch up from the edge of your shingle, which creates this really deep shadow line, which was actually a study that you had done in modeling and then we had done on site, understanding what is that depth and where do we find this happy medium of enough but not too much and not too little, and which is how we ended up with this 3/4. So that 3/4 inch material is here, which allows for airflow to go up. It doesn't allow insects. You can see it's a corrugated plastic that then has this, filter fabric or something over the top of it.
Yeah, and that's a product that's typically on the bottom of Rainscreen assemblies where you'd have a closed Rainscreen. And so here we're just adapting that to each of the horizontal coursings. Your comment about the pine tar and how it's applied to all 6 sides, one of the nuances in this application is as the painters were applying this, the pine tar draws into the material in different ways. And so, as I was mentioning, on the faces of the plywood, you have that 1/8 inch of actual wood before a lamination layer. So you only need the pine tar material to saturate 1/8. Whereas if you were using this to waterproof a boat hull and get full saturation, and then layering and layering and layering until that was, you know, a kind of really solid water seal. In this case, we could go much thinner. The mixture that we developed, which is a combination of the pine tar, boiled linseed oil, and raw turpentine, is specific so that it thinned the pine tar the way we wanted, and then it drew it into the wood the amount that we needed. Once you realize that there's a little bit of film building up, you stop applying because it's saturated well, and you move on. Whereas on the end cuts, there's so much more saturation that can happen into it. So all 6 sides are finished, but it's a different application. The guys were brushing and adding much more to the ends to get a more robust, robust seal.
You know, we actually coated everything here. We set up a tent and basically had this production line where we knew every shingle had to be coated before it got installed. We looked at doing it a number of different ways and ultimately said, let's fully coat these things before they get installed. And there was just this production line of hundreds and hundreds of shingles. The Rainscreen, we do have that ventilation, but to your point, we also have the ventilation at the very bottom. So ultimately, you know, behind the shingles, we have horizontal strapping pieces, which is a pressure treated lumber, which is then cut on a bevel to capture the bevel of the shingle. Since it's so large, we want to basically follow that bevel on that shingle. And then once the shingle is installed, you are then installing your core vent again, and then that is where your screw layer is here, and then again you go up and follow the horizontals.
And it laps up all the way over the ridge to a ridge vent. So that cavity that's created for ventilation is continuous all the way up.
Yeah, because behind those horizontals are your vertical. It's important to note those verticals are actually tied back to our structure, not our plywood, but wall framing and rafters. Yesterday it was raining, the roof is not complete yet, and you could actually see the water drain down the face of the rock wall and drain all the way down, and you see the
yeah, any down. Water that gets behind there is going to be fine draining off that rock wool continuously over the envelope. And even anything that managed to get behind that is going to drain off of the primary weather barrier, which is the peel and stick
which you can see on the backside there, if you look closely, that anything that's made it through has drained all the way down, and you can see the puddling. We kind of accepted the plywood for what it was. And when we were installing them, we realized that they just weren't square enough. The team actually took the liberty on their own, said, we know what the expectation is here. We need to cut these. And they went back and recut all the shingles to make sure that they were perfectly square, because you actually have these perfect 1/8 inch gaps, you know, between every single shingle. And you see that, you know, in between each shingle, you see that up, you see that below, and then you see that on the corners. And that was, you know, again, this is part of the team buying into what the vision is, and what, you know, behind the architecture and ultimately the build itself. Furthermore, they built these handful of jigs here. They built to make sure that our screw patterns were similar. They were always screwing in 1 inch and up, I believe, 1.5 inches. Someone had asked about the screw color. Why didn't you use black? Frankly, I really appreciate the fact that you can see the screw.
The less paint, the better. I mean, granted, we're coating this with pine tar, but it's the same sort of design philosophy. The windows are clear anodized aluminum instead of a painted color on top. There's also something about the weathering of this. So over time, like here you can see the kind of color of the grain coming through. Over time, the pine tar is not protecting so much from UV exposure. So the plywood's gonna silver and gray. And as the pine tar thins, and the plywood grays, this building over the next 5 to 10 years is going to take on a subtle but, you know, continuously beautiful character, because you can imagine this being more silver through a thinner, you know, wear of this until it's coated again in 5 years. Is about this kind of embracing weathering and designing towards, you know, that process.
So when we get to the corners, traditionally in a shingle, you would have this lap here, but you'd flip this one back over on this one, which is, you know, classic shingle install. Why are we not doing it on this house? Okay,
so now we're in the world squarely of architectural principles and ideas. And there's a fun effect here that we're trying to amplify. The building is really long. And so there's an idea about continuity. And so these long elevations are continuous, And instead of weaving the corner, which means that the expression of the envelope turns the corner, this is more about continuity in this direction forever, as if it was like a glitch and just kept going. And it's a minor move, but builders and some folks will notice that it's not woven. I think that as all these details kind of sum up, someone just living in the home or seeing it for the first time or living with it over time, it's very minor, but it creates a unique relationship to a specific building. So it's a similar intention with the way the returns on the windows are done.
Yeah, so you have this west side that climbs up, and as you run up the roof, you're still lapping the same direction.
We didn't want end grain facing the sky. So if you did weave it, you'd have this problem where as you go up across the roof, you'd have end grain open to weather,
right,
to the sky.
You'd either continue to weave it or you'd have a woven corner and an unwoven roof.
Exactly.
This is actually a great view into the cross section of what's going on, where you have your 2x4 at the very bottom here, and then you can see how that one is about 2 inches beveled, and then you get to something that's closer to maybe 1.25 inches that's beveled, and then about 5/8 that's beveled, and it follows that shingle, and you can then see how this right here is your core vent and then your second shingle. So you can see that overlap. Now, important to note, this right here is actually notched. We'll see it around the corner for this jamb piece, but this here got cut. So this will get recoated before we put that jamb piece, which is partly why it's not coated right now, because the jamb's not in. But in here, you would think, based on some other projects that we've worked on, that we would have turned these shingles and woven, or not woven them, but beveled them.
Returned that coursing back to the windows. So,
and I remember it being this like, why aren't we doing that? And seeing it done, well, now I understand, but walk us through that decision making.
Yeah, so this has to do with the details and the formal language of the building relating to the spaces and the way those spaces are used and how you kind of perceive connections through the building. So more simply put, we didn't return the shingled coursing because you'd get a sawtooth against the window frame. There's more continuity between the interior and the exterior. So that's about expressing continuity. And the other way to think about it, it's like cutting a log cake or something. It's just these cuts are clean and the spaces of the window are clean cuts through it as if it was cutting a layer cake. We're gonna have to cut to Christina's birthday cake. We've got this ongoing joke where everyone keeps kind of baking each other birthday cakes of projects we've done. And there's actually a Echo Pond log cake baked to scale.
That's a great way to explain it, whereas though this wall was in existence first. Yeah. And then we kind of depressed the window through it, and this is your cross section.
Are you sure you didn't go to school for architecture?
I am positive. I'm learning a lot from you. But I want to talk about the technical aspect of pulling this off, because when we were on site, we were thinking about, well, how do we do this jamb when this shingle has to tuck under this? And that's what you were seeing around the corner, is that this shingle stops and it notches and it then goes up behind. So when we're installing them, these guys, the team of carpenters are on site are making sure that these are all aligned, but then you have to notch this shingle to go behind the jamb. Because this right here looks, relatively simple. It's kind of Christmas tree shaped in this direction, and that alone actually has to be templated. So there's a lot of coordination on this section right here.
To create something that is effortless takes a lot of consideration.
Effortless is a terrible.
Effortless looking, it takes a lot of consideration. I mean, another one of the details that I really love and that, was essentially figured out in the field was you'll see at the exterior header of the window, we don't have a drip edge behind those shingles. And, really intelligently, the core vent continues across behind the shingle. So any water that's returning, the guys realized is just gonna get interrupted and broken by that core vent. So we don't need a metal drip edge there. And then to go even further, and this wasn't on our drawings, is that trim piece, the cap at the header, is raked so it drains forward instead of back towards the window, which you can't see because it's in deep shadow. But there's a lot of really naturally high performing moves in just adjusting geometry like that.
Yeah, and just being considerate. I mean, we know that that could be a piece that might need to be replaced eventually, but they went as far as they can to, again, respect the vision of the design, but, put it on that slight bevel so water dripped out, add the core vent so water can get out. And they actually went as far to install WRB on the back side of it. So if water did get trapped there, it's not just sitting on top of that pine tar, though waterproofing.
Well, yeah.
It's shedding, right? We're actually standing on ground that won't be here. This will be a rock fall. But when you look up at the roof, you're gonna need to do a maintenance coat there, and you actually can't see it on here. But if you look over there, there's a red roof jack. You'll start seeing them put them up as they start to install. And on the other side, they're actually installed all the way across. Every 8 feet, we would install a headlock down into the framing, and we would leave it a 1/4 inch off the face of the plywood. So those roof jacks we can come back a year from now and slide up, knowing every 8 feet there's gonna be a gap in that core vent, and we can connect the roof jack to it. So just thinking about maintenance coats and how we maintain the home, we knew that it would be very difficult, especially on this side, to get back to.
You're not going to get a boom truck through here once all this grading
Absolutely
comes
not.
out. Yeah.
So we can approach the front side, we can set up our staging, we can install our harness clips, and then we can get to this side and we can actually put all our staging on to make it easy, or easier for them to do this install. You can actually see, that's actually a great view right here, how the core vents left out for those 4 inches, and then our headlock is there so they can just slide that roof jack up and clip it in. Your gutter line, let's talk through what I'm seeing here and then there.
Yeah, so we definitely needed a drip edge for the steep pitch on this roof. And so that's that real thin piece of black metal trim that you see below the bottom of the shingles. We're gonna create a waterfall over this dog trot in the middle of the building. And so we did need a gutter, but that gutter is simply to divert the deluge from that roof at those 2 openings. And we wanted to take that really simple metal line and then do something with brake metal that was just elegant and straightforward. So that's just a piece of flat that was bent. They tacked kind of brackets into the end and then folded down 2 weeps to let water out. And it's kind of funny, the carpenter was mentioning that when he went to pick up the gutters, he went and asked the metal guy for the gutters, and he was like, I need the gutters. What are these? But it's just straightforward, brake work on.
He was like, ask the architect, this is the gutter. We added a bracket in the middle as well, just for stability, mainly for ice, just in case. But as water comes over, it just drips out, and you will have this stone band around the house where you don't need the downspout. You're not getting really splash up on the home. On
the north side of the building, there's really very little articulation. You just see the mega shingles, you see the opening for the dog trot, and you see 1 large window to the living room. On this side, there's many more windows. There's a lot of the utility through the roof, the skylights. When you have these functional elements added to the building, if you can detail them in a way where they're still functional, but they're not so familiar. So when you see them, it's not signaling this is a product, this is a thing that you know exactly what it is. It makes architecture like this kind of have its own sort of personality, its own soul.
This is really the business end of the home. There's a lot going on, skylights and utilities. Mark, the super on the project, spent a lot of time making sure that all of the venting, the plumbing, the ERV, the bath fan, everything comes out in one straight line. When the shingles are on and all the caps are on, he's got black sleeves for the PVC, he's got these black hats for the ERV intake and exhaust, and everything is nice and intentional. Hopefully we answered a lot of your questions on the mega shingle. We know that this is something that you're not typically seeing. It's something that people have been trying to do for decades now, and here we are pulling it off, so there you go.